Thanks everyone for joining. We're just going to give people another moment to get logged in and we will get started. All right, welcome everybody to the 2026 Celiac Disease College Summit. I'm Vanessa Weisberg, the Chief Education and Community Engagement Officer at the Celiac Disease Foundation, and I am so excited for tonight. This is one of my favorite events of the year with one of my favorite groups of physicians, dietitians, advocates, and just wonderful humans in the celiac disease community. This is also a very personal event for me. I was diagnosed myself with celiac disease 22 years ago when I was a senior in college. And let me tell you, 22 years ago, there were no gluten-free products at my college. Our dietitian told us that my big things to eat were coffee and white rice in our dining hall. So things were not so great back then. So it brings me great joy that today we have so many wonderful resources, colleges doing a lot of things in the right ways, and brand new guidelines to really help students with celiac disease succeed in the college setting. So welcome to the summit, and I'm going to quickly just introduce all of the great people that we have in the room. So, joining me from the Celiac Disease Foundation, we have Megan Donnelly, who is our Director of Health Communications, and Emma Cowson, who is our Senior Coordinator of Education and Community Engagement. We have Ann Lee, who's a dietitian at the Celiac Disease Center at Columbia University and also a nutrition advisor to the foundation. We have Dr. Drew Ford, who is one of the coolest humans I have ever met. And we are so excited for him to be here tonight as a doctor, but more importantly, a person who was diagnosed with celiac disease and navigated all of this while in college and medical school. So thank you, Drew, so much for being here and sharing your story. We have Francie Kelly from Boston Children's Hospital, who runs the Celiac Kid Connection, Jackie Johnson also from Columbia's Celiac Disease Center and an incredible advocate, Rachel Lieberman from the University of Chicago Celiac Center, and the one, the only, the most incredible Dr. Ritu Verma, who runs the University of Chicago Celiac Disease Center. And truly, I mean, she's like a world-renowned celiac, like expert hero, legend, but she's also mom to kids with celiac disease who also went through this themselves. So thank you all so much for your time and dedication for doing this summit every year. And I am going to now hand it over to Drew to get us started.
All right, sounds great. Let me just share my screen here. All right. Everybody see? Perfect. There we go. All right, now we're in presenter mode. Perfect. So my name is Drew Ford. I try not to call myself doctor in these more casual settings, but yes, I'm a doctor. I'm a gastroenterologist, and I graduated from Northeast Ohio Medical University back in 2020. But more importantly, the reason why I'm with you here today is because I have celiac disease, and that actually really shaped my decision to go into medicine altogether. So when I was diagnosed back in 2011, uh, similarly to Vanessa's experience, there was very little on the market that we had to choose from, and I had kind of explained to the folks in the dining hall at my undergrad what all I needed to avoid, and there was a lot of I had to learn what I had and then communicate it, and there was a lot to deal with at that time. So thank goodness. So many wonderful people have done so much work in the meantime to develop excellent options for gluten-free, but also developing great advocacy tools. And you'll see plenty of that from the Celiac Disease Foundation, SSCD. Um, but ultimately, it was a diagnosis that got me into medicine. And I hope that there are at least some of you that might feel that same spark. And if you have that spark, I highly encourage you to pursue it because it's been a wonderful experience going down that path. But of course, it doesn't mean you have to go into medicine if you have celiac disease. But you're going to go to college. That's why you're here. And we're here to talk to you about how to navigate that experience as a celiac disease patient. With that said, I want to make things a little casual, open up the floor. Feel free to use the chat. I'm curious what some of your questions are about college life with celiac disease. And for fun, feel free to throw in what your favorite gluten-free meal is. I'll just be watching the chat as things come up.
If anyone has trouble with the chat, you can also drop it in the Q&A. Oh, there we go. It's working.
Wait, salmon and rice. Excellent. Wonderful protein, wonderful carbs. Can't go wrong. How to avoid cross-contamination when I have to have a meal plan? Excellent question. So I can definitely get to that. So, depending on the college that you're going to, some colleges they'll have dedicated cafeterias. At least this is my experience, and what I've seen, kind of looking at things in the years after. They have dedicated halls that are meant for celiac disease patients, in the sense that they're not entirely gluten-free, but they have separate cookware and separate utensils. They have a protocol to follow in that cafeteria to minimize the cross-contamination. Certainly, there is going to be a risk for cross-contamination in some settings, but knowing where those dedicated cafeterias are is going to really help. And then what I can say they've done a very good job of is ensuring that anything on their menus is clearly delineated as gluten-free. Certainly that is something you want to keep an eye out for. And something that you're going to see in multiple of our talks today is that you want to be an advocate for yourself. It is work, but it definitely makes the experience better to find the resources early. Whether it be through disability services or through the health services there, they will put you in touch with who you need to be in touch with. To know exactly where these cafeterias are that have the protocols for celiac patients. Granted, it'd be wonderful if there were cafeterias that were dedicated completely to celiac disease patients, but unfortunately, there's not enough of us. So this is a good alternative. So let me go through some of these other questions. So many good options here for food. I mean, I'm starting to get hungry. I just ate dinner. Chicken and rice, gluten-free ramen. Ooh, wonderful. So how do I pick a college based on dietary needs? That's a great question. But I want to turn around and say that the college should not dictate that. It certainly should be a strong consideration, but I mean, most colleges these days will have a protocol in place to navigate celiac disease. Um, and remember, you do have a lot of options at your disposal um, to get exceptions to various policies, like, oh, you have to live in the dorm and to go to cafeterias no matter what your first year. At least in my undergraduate, it got to the point where you could advocate for yourself to be in off-campus housing if you had celiac disease. I know some folks who did that in their first year. And obviously, in off-campus housing, it's a lot easier to maintain a cross-contamination free environment. Um, what that is to say is that there's many ways to approach this and navigate it such that you don't have to limit yourself based on colleges just for the sole purpose of celiac disease. Let's see. What are colleges legally required to provide for celiac students? That is a great question. I do not have the legal background to extremely confidently say that, but the ADA does give a significant amount of strength to us in terms of what we can advocate for. And I know obviously the Celiac Disease Foundation does a lot of work in advocacy to this end. And yes, thank you, thank you, Vanessa. Folks much more qualified than myself to talk about the legal components of that. We'll certainly do that. Let's see here. As a junior, when do I start getting in touch with the school dietitian? Um, Great question. I would say actually before you commit, you can certainly try to make that connection. It may take a little bit of digging on your part, but certainly if that does play even a slight component in your decision making, you should at least have that conversation, or and see how easy it is to navigate. Because getting a hold of that dietitian will be somewhat of a surrogate to help, like, give you a sense of how easy is it to navigate this process at the college that you're looking at. So that's an excellent question. Um, how to talk to coaches about celiac disease and accommodating for road games. That's a great question. And I mean, it really kind of gets back to advocating for yourself. So, if you're being if you're being recruited, and you're looking seriously at a program, I mean, I know that depending on division and depending on what institution you're looking at, resources for nutrition are extensive at certain colleges for their sports programs. Particularly. So you definitely want to be upfront about that and advocate for yourself, because though depending on the sport, depending on the size of the program, they very likely have dedicated nutrition on top of what's available at the college already. And the coach could definitely get you in the right get you in touch with the right people. And then for road games, unfortunately, gosh, I can't say I've ever traveled for a road college game as an athlete, but I can imagine there's a good bit of bus travel, and you may be to your own devices during some of that, but definitely something to bring up with the coach and the nutrition staff for your team. I don't want to miss anything here, so let me just double check. What options are there if they don't feel comfortable with the cafeteria food and not being cross-contaminated? Kind of reiterate. So one option is, depending on how lenient your school is with it, and how feasible it is for you, is to pursue off-campus housing. There's always like apartments in college towns that you can live in, and that's what I did when I got diagnosed. Was sought my own apartment in the town right next to my college. And I just found that it put me more at ease, especially back when they didn't have these protocols as set in stone. And again, it comes to advocating for yourself, because sometimes they'll try to impose that you have to stay on campus when you're first year. But you should have an out from that. Depending on what school you're talking to, you most often should have an out from that with the celiac disease. Um, let's see, that should be all of it. But just moving to the next, yeah, I'm just going to bring up some points here that I may have already kind of alluded to here in answering some of your questions. But really, at the end of the day, communication is key. So, what I want you to do when you're looking at colleges, when you're getting to that college, is to communicate with the disability advocates there, with the nutritionists there, the cafeterias. Know how to navigate that right off the bat, because you are your best advocate in that sense. Um, Disability Services is really a fantastic resource at most, if not all colleges. Um, and then get a sense of what accommodations you might like to pursue based on the college that you're looking at. If you're going in thinking that you're going to be most comfortable and off-campus housing because you can control that environment, it's a very reasonable ask. Just make sure that you know that you're going in asking for that, and be insistent, be firm about that. If you end up in shared housing, be clear with your roommates. A lot of people don't quite understand the effect of cross-contamination. It varies from celiac patient to celiac patient, but some people respond very violently to cross contamination. So, I honestly, just a pro tip, having experienced the disease myself, honestly, I found the easiest way to communicate that is that it's an allergy. Um, even though technically pathophysiologically it's not an allergy, that gives people the sense that, oh, your life is in danger. Maybe not that severe, but they need to avoid it coming in contact with your food, with your utensils. Just be clear about that, and definitely spend time on some of the apps and on Google. The internet gets better and better about telling you what your resources are from from a restaurant standpoint, from a grocery store standpoint. And there are celiac disease communities growing in cities, especially large cities. So definitely kind of get a sense for what's around you. And when you talk to the cafeterias, definitely ask about what their practices are. If they don't seem to have practices, heaven forbid, you may want to pursue more of that off-campus housing option. But I can say again, based on experience, based on kind of looking back and seeing what's been happening since I was in college, the practices have gotten extensively better. So with that said, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Ritu Verma, and thank you all for your time so far.
Thank you, Dr. Ford. So welcome everyone. It's so really wonderful to see that there are so many people who are interested in this topic. So for this segment, what we are going to do is talk about from a physician patient standpoint, how do you prepare yourself to go to college? And don't worry, all the questions that you had are going to be answered about advocacy. How can you do avoid cross contamination, nutrition? When do you get in touch with dietitians and all? So just hang on, all of that will be covered. So I know that Dr. Ford said that maybe it's you can pick on some of the things from which college you pick. But my next slide will tell you that, in my opinion, do not pick your college just based on the fact that you have celiac disease. Celiac disease and gluten-free diet should not define where you live, how you live, and in what way you live. You just have other people who are going to help you. So pick a college because you want to be there, not because your disease needs to be there, but you want to be there. So the next slide. Again, you've done so many things in terms of getting ready for college. You've done your SATs and your whatever ACTs and many other things. So just like that, you want to be prepared to get to college and know about your disease. So what should you do? Next slide. So often when you have appointments, you have appointments where you're talking about your labs and you're talking about your belly aches and you're talking about all of those kind of things. In this case, whenever you want to, or in my opinion, I think as soon as you get into high school, you start thinking about college. Everyone else is thinking about college, so why won't you think about college as a student? So set up an appointment. Tell your parents you want an appointment with your clinical team. And that appointment should be just talking about college, not about your labs, not about anything else. It's a college appointment. So your physician and your nurse practitioner and your dietitian and your psychologist and everyone is in the mode that they're going to talk to you about college. So let's get prepared. You prepared a lot for your exams and your ACTs and everything else. Now let's go on the journey of celiac disease in college. You can have that appointment with or without your parents. I'm sure your parents will understand if you say, hey, listen, this appointment is mine. I need to be there. And do that. And also prepare to ask questions. And you might say, oh my God, what questions do I ask? What should I ask? Well, let's go through a little bit of that with the next slide. So get ready for this, but come in with your questions. So some of you may have been just diagnosed with celiac disease. So now you know what celiac disease is and everything else. Some of you might have been diagnosed many years ago. So you might just need a refresher. And there's nothing wrong in saying to your clinical team, hey, take me on the journey like as if I've just been diagnosed with celiac disease and thus been diagnosed with celiac disease at my age, which is going to be different than the education that a 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 6-year-old is going to get. So let's talk about the disease. Ask that question, you'll get an answer. Then you sit back and say, how was my diagnosis made? Did I have a bellyache when my diagnosis was made, or it was just made because my brother ended up with celiac? So find out how was your diagnosis made. And now that I have had this diagnosis, how do I go about taking care of myself from the disease standpoint? And also, I've got to do all this studying. I've got to do socialization, but I also have to do studies. You know, my parents are going to be asking me, what are those grades coming along, right? So I need to get my studies and things. And then everybody talks about the diet and the diet and the diet and the diet. But besides the diet, do I need to think about nutrition, vitamins? I'm into sports. What supplements do I need? So that's a question that you come in with the dietitian with this appointment, and you do that. Then you find out from your doctor, look, I've never been exposed to gluten before, but what happened to me in the past? Because, you know, we have all this information in our electronic medical record. You may not even know how to access that medical record. So now you want to find out, how do I access the medical record? What happens if I have a gluten exposure? So don't go afraid to college thinking, oh my God, I never asked them, what do I do if I get exposed to gluten? Do I run to the nurse? Do I call my mom or my dad? Or do I call you? What do I do? So get to know about your disease. What is the exposure? What do I do when I get exposed? Do I panic? Or do I take it easy, take a deep breath, learn from it? That is part of what your GI team needs to teach you to get ready for that. Okay, so now I got diagnosed in Chicago. I practice in Chicago. So I got diagnosed in Chicago and I'm going to college to New York. What do I do? Do I continue with you, or do I continue and find someone in New York? Now, there's a lot of people on this call who are from New York, so absolutely you can see them there. But do I continue with you or not? And that's a conversation. There's pros and cons. You can decide, I'm going to stay with my team back in Chicago, but I will also have someone in New York that is going to help take care of me. But that's a conversation you've got to have. And also your primary care might say, listen, I cannot take care of you if you're moving out to California or something. Let's find someone there. How do my teams talk to each other? That's a conversation you need to have with your clinical team so they can tell you, this is how we talk to each other. So I can call my friends in California, or I can call my friends in New York and say, my patient is coming over. How do we communicate? And then, okay, you guys are communicating. How do I communicate with you? So I'm the patient. How do I communicate with you? Get to know about your electronic medical record. How do I communicate? Who's the person? Is it the nurse I communicate with? Is I do with the nurse, the dietitian, whoever? Get to know your team that is in your home base and the team that is in your college. And now my parents, should I keep them involved? Now I'm a parent of children, as you heard Vanessa saying, of course you keep your parents involved. No, you keep your parents as involved as you want to. Your conversation should be with your clinical team. Your parents should trust that you're taking care of things, and only to get the trust, you've got to do it right. So keep your parents involved, at least for the first couple of years, and then you can fly on your own. So first couple of years, please do keep them involved. And then you need your medical records. Now, in this world of electronic medical records, there are many institutions that are connected electronically. You need to find out if your institution is connected or not. And then, of course, there's the whole insurance coverage that I don't even want to talk about, but it is something that you need to know, and it will be covered. Insurance is a big thing. Otherwise, no one can pay for your labs and everything else. So that is where we all have to grow up. I know we don't want to grow up, but we got to grow up and learn about insurance as well and how to get medical records. And this will be covered further down as well. So next slide, please. So when now you have your home base where the diagnosis was made, you're going to college and you decide that you're not going to get to another clinical practice there. You have to know what's on at college. You may have no symptoms at all when you get diagnosed, or you get gluten exposure, or you may get a lot of symptoms, or maybe you have another condition that comes along with celiac disease like diabetes and so on. So you really need to know what is on campus. Is there a nurse always on campus? Is there a doctor on campus? Is there a nurse practitioner on campus? Are there medications? What can I get there? That's something you really need to know. And you need to make sure that your primary team has sent a letter to your team who's on college so that they also know that you have celiac disease and what your reactions are, so they know as well. So get to know what's on campus from a clinical standpoint. And then I know further down we'll talk about how do you get your food from off campus. How do you get your mom to send you a package from Amazon? You need to find out, where is that package going to come? Is it coming to your dorm? Is it coming to a little post office box, and so on? So those are the nitty-gritties that you will need to know when you get on campus, and you'll find out, is there a pharmacy that delivers the medications? Where do they deliver? Do they deliver to your dorm room, or do they deliver to the clinic center? What are the hours of the clinic center? So those are all the things that will be covered with you when you have that 1 hour appointment with your clinical team before you run off to college. And always stay in touch. Stay in touch with your clinical team, whichever one it is. Next slide. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Vanessa.
Thank you, Dr. Verma and Drew. Those were both absolutely amazing presentations. So we are going to switch gears now and talk about how we actually get to those accommodations. So as I'm sure you've all thought about already, there are lots of challenges with the transition to college. You're living away from home for possibly the first time. You have shared living spaces. There are, of course, increased educational demands. You're balancing lots of different things between your classes, your social life, and extracurricular activities. You're choosing a major and developing a career path, or at least thinking about one. And you're probably managing finances on your own for the first time. And all of these things are hard on top of managing celiac disease and figuring out how to feed yourself. We sort of take for granted eating and that just going to college, you're going to go to the dining halls, you're going to grab it all at once. But with celiac disease, we know we can't do that. And so 22 years after I was diagnosed with celiac disease, I was sitting with Mary Vargas, who is one of the leading disability rights attorneys in the United States. And we were actually on a celiac cruise, and we were having a conversation at dinner about how we must have college guidelines, true guidelines that are grounded in the legal rights that people should be getting when they're in the college setting, as well as the reasonable pieces that we can expect colleges to adapt. And so I have never been more proud than to share that these recommendations were published this year in a peer-reviewed medical journal, as well as a beautiful handbook for families and students. And so I'm going to talk through how we made how we got to these recommendations, and then what they actually say. So how do we create college guidelines? Much like tonight, where we brought together experts, we brought together all of the leading experts from across the country. So this is just one picture from our in-person symposium in Boston. You can see a lot of us in person, and then a few who joined us remotely. I'm going to put up all of their headshots just to show you the depth of people who contributed to this. So we had physicians, we had social workers, we had college students, we had dietitians, we had our, of course, Celiac Disease Foundation, we had parents from all across the country. There were 37 experts who participated in this. We had representatives from colleges and universities, we had directors of food services, we had food service chefs, food service dietitians, disability service personnel to really help us understand how the disability services department really plays the role in shepherding this. And of course, legal experts, which were truly incredibly important to make sure that everything we put together was grounded in what was legally acceptable. So how did we get there? So we put together a panel of 40 experts that I just talked about. We looked at everything that had been published over the last 25 years, which there was very little, as you can imagine. And we interviewed stakeholders across the country about what the issues were and where we really needed to go from day one to getting a really good set of comprehensive recommendations that met all of the legal standards. So this pre-work was about a 6-month process, and then we held a summit in Boston in April of last year. We drafted initial recommendations. We went through this whole very scientifically sound process of refining them. And our final output was 24 recommendations across academics, housing, dining, and campus life. So I will pause for a second with this screen up so that you can scan both of these QR codes. You're going to see them a lot through this presentation, but I beg you to please download both of these. They are very important for you to have. On the left, you have our actual paper that was published in the journal Nutrients. This is really important because we didn't want to just write the recommendations and throw them online and throw them in a PDF. We really wanted these recommendations to be peer reviewed by the medical community and accepted so that we could make sure that people actually took them and gave them to their patients and really utilized them in lots of different ways. So on the left-hand side, you can download a copy of the published paper. And on the right-hand side, you can download the full handbook. The full handbook is really important because it has lots of helpful tables and FAQs and how to utilize all this thing. So first and foremost, in the handbook, there is a table of all the people that you will need to be in contact with. If you do nothing else when you first get to college, rip out this page from the handbook and fill it in with all of your key contacts. Take a picture of it in your phone so that you always have it with you so that you can easily get in touch with these people. Within the guide, you can use this as you go as a reference for understanding your legal protections, which we're going to talk more about in a minute. There are checklists for requesting accommodations and getting ready to go to college. There are tools for communicating with all of the different departments, everything from your professors and peers and disability services, all the way to how do you explain it to a coach, or how do you talk about celiac disease to your roommates. And it's really a tool to organize all of your important contacts, the deadlines, and any notes that you take about getting your accommodations. So let's talk about the legal right. So all students or people with celiac disease are protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Now, what's really important about these laws is that while it does require accommodations, it requires that the accommodations are reasonable and they do not dramatically alter the state of the institution. So, for example, we can't go and request that the entire campus go gluten-free. That would not be reasonable. We can't request that they build a dedicated gluten-free dining hall. So we have to think reasonably in all of this. So what these laws do is that they require colleges and universities to provide the necessary accommodations to access safe gluten-free food and to participate in all parts of the college experience the same as your peers. If they don't provide accommodations, they do risk violating civil rights law, as well as just jeopardizing your health, your success, and they can face pretty serious legal consequences. There is lots of precedent. There have been several recent settlements that have reinforced that celiac disease is a disability and covered under these laws. The handbook does outline all of these cases, and I would encourage you to read them in detail. I'm not going to go through them all tonight just because we really do want to get into the practical pieces of the accommodations, but please do download the handbook and read through them. So working with disability services is one of the most important things you can do. For almost every university I've ever worked with, they are the hub and the holder of how you get things done. They are the ones that you provide your documentation to, proving your diagnosis of celiac disease. They coordinate with all of the different departments to bring in the dietitians, the food service providers, all of the people that would be needed to make sure you get the accommodations. They're also the ones that determine what your accommodations will be in partnership with you and your family. And then they're the ones overall who make sure that those accommodations are implemented and are followed through on. So this is the checklist. This is on page 28 of the handbook. And again, I told you I was going to have this QR code up here many, many times. So if you have not scanned it yet, please do so now. This appendix on page 28 is your checklist and your guide to really all of the steps that you need to take to make sure that you get accommodations. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but it's really your roadmap to making sure that your college experience is successful, and just a reminder of all of the things that you need to be doing. So one of the most important pieces of all of this is the diagnosis letter you get from your doctor. Now, on this call, you have some amazing doctors who know exactly how to do this, but not every gastroenterologist does this correctly. And one of the biggest barriers for students getting accommodations is not having a letter from your doctor that clearly states what your needs are. So, to help with that, the handbook does have a sample diagnosis letter with all of the key points in it that will make your life easier. So, obviously, we need to have your name, your birth date, and we need to have a clear statement that you have celiac disease. We need to have an ADA qualification statement. Putting this in the letter will make your life astronomically easier, that your medical professional is reminding the institution celiac disease is covered as a disability because it substantially limits one or more major life activities. Eating and digestive function are major activities that are affected for every single person with celiac disease, and that's how you qualify. It's also helpful for the letter to talk about the functional impact of celiac disease as well as provide their contact information. So it's really helpful if you have a physician who isn't affiliated with a celiac center that's part of the Society for the Study of Celiac Disease, or even if they are, they might not all be doing it right. That when you ask them to put together your diagnosis letter, that you tell them to include this information. Please take this letter, screenshot it, print it out, give it to your doctor, and remind them that this is very crucially important to make sure that you get the accommodations you need. So I'm going to go through the accommodations. Again, these are all in the handbook. And again, please scan the QR code if you have not. And I would encourage you to read all of these closely because each section has like A1 is academic one accommodation, and they have really good explanations to help you understand what this accommodation is and why it's important. So extended time on assignments or exams. This is really important that it's only in the situation if you're symptomatic from a gluten exposure. And this is a really important point because with celiac disease, once you're on a gluten-free diet, the goal is to not be exposed. And so we would want to see this used sparingly and only when it's from a true gluten exposure and not something that is used every single time you need a test. Most students with celiac disease, unless there are other conditions occurring alongside it, should not need regular extended time on assignments or exams. We put this in because we wanted to make sure that if you are symptomatic from a gluten exposure, that you would have the option to have that extra time. Academic 2, modified participation in food-related coursework or labs, making sure that anytime there is food involved in any of your classes, that there is a reasonable accommodation. You could be offered a gluten-free substitute, or if you're not supposed to eat the food, appropriate protective wear, gloves, or masks to avoid getting exposed. Everybody is going to have a different comfort level here, and I really want to stress that these accommodations are not one size fits all, and not every single person needs every single one of these accommodations. So it's really important that you read them and that you think about what will actually impact your experience. Of course, you want access to a safe gluten-free environment for exams or class activities. If there's food involved in classes, exams, or projects, we want to make sure that there are gluten-free options that are available and also that they're discussed in advance. Ability to leave class without penalty. If you are experiencing illness due to a gluten exposure during an academic event, a student should be able to leave without penalty. And also, something that's become increasingly important is that as lectures are recorded and that as there are the ability to have audio or video recordings, that those things be made available to you. And then just playing off of that, having remote learning options when they are available and when you aren't able to attend because of a gluten exposure. Housing accommodations, I'm going to go through very quickly because Emma is going to do a deep dive into housing. But some of the accommodations that you will see in the handbook are access to priority housing selection, roommate considerations, living in proximity to gluten-free dining options, access to single or low-use bathrooms, or very close to a communal bathroom if that is your only option. It's never fun if your symptoms of celiac disease or gluten exposure are vomiting and diarrhea. It sucks to be in a communal bathroom. We've all been there. And so it is very reasonable to request a single or a very low use shared bathroom for celiac disease. We all know that with celiac, if you have limited options, having access to cook is very important. And so having access to small appliances. And then some schools restrict car access. And so it is reasonable to ask to have a car so that you can go grocery shopping. For dining accommodations, again, Megan is going to talk a lot about this, so I will keep it brief. But we want to make sure that you have consistent access to safe gluten-free meals, that the staff has been trained on celiac disease and cross-contact, that you have access to ingredient lists and allergen labeling, that you have a direct line of communication with dining managers, dietitians, and the lead chef. It's very important that you're able to talk to the person who is actually making your food. That in some cases, depending on how your school sets up meals, that you could pre-order or make custom meal options. And if there are no way for your school to accommodate, that you could be exempt from meal plans. Please do read that part carefully, because dining is such an incredibly important part of the college experience. And so we really want exemption from the meal plans to be a last resort. Oftentimes you can only enter the dining hall if you have a meal plan. And so we don't want to exclude students from the social elements if we can make accommodations possible. And then in some schools, there is access to dedicated gluten-free zones or equipment. This is not something that every school will be able to do, but we do want it to be available when it's possible. All right, so dining is very important. And what I want you to understand and take away from tonight is that these accommodations, these recommendations are not a path to having dedicated gluten-free experiences on every single campus. They're really a roadmap to making sure that you have a safe experience and have access to safe food. And so I'm going to share a number of different ways in which colleges and universities do that to help you see the variety of what's out there. So some colleges and universities would have a dedicated gluten-free dining station or kitchen, which is a standalone station, a kitchen within a dining facility that exclusively prepares and serves gluten-free meals using separate everything. You'll see on the bottom left-hand side, there are QR codes to go to specific universities that are doing this, so you can read more about how this is done in a real college setting. So there's lots of reasons why this is good for kids with celiac disease. Obviously, it minimizes your cross-contamination risk. It isolates gluten-free food, which is great. You don't have to worry about cross-contact. There's peace of mind when you have clearly labeled and safe food, and it really does foster inclusion and independence, allowing you to dine alongside peers. But there's also challenges. We hear from students all the time that these specific gluten-free dining stations or kitchens are only in one specific location, and you might have to walk a really long way to get there. I was talking to a student recently that they went to a college because they were or not the only reason, but one of the reasons was that they had a dedicated gluten-free dining hall, but it was a 25-minute walk from their dorm. And so that is just not convenient for anybody. And so it was not as fabulous as they thought it was going to be. On the food service side, it requires a huge investment in staff training, equipment, and ongoing compliance checks. So there are pros and there are cons to every situation we're going to talk about. Allergen-friendly menu integration with strict protocols. So what this means is that there are gluten-free meals available throughout all the different campus dining facilities with clearly marked items and carefully implemented food safety protocols. This is good for our students with celiac because it provides access and variety by integrating gluten-free options into standard menus across all of the dining halls. It requires that staff are really accountable with their training and allergen protocols and that they have designated prep areas. And it really supports your daily life on campus because you can eat anywhere across campus the same way without having to go to a specific place. Challenges that we encounter in these setups is that sometimes students are unsure about how cross-contact is really handled because you don't see how it's happening. It's behind the scenes. And on the food service side, it requires constant vigilance to really avoid errors, especially at really busy times. So another model is pre-ordered or packaged gluten-free meal program. And this is a model where students would pre-order gluten-free meals that are prepared in a dedicated, controlled environment, and then they pick them up from a designated location. And oftentimes these meals are frozen, and then you would have access to heat them up. So this is a good option because you have a really high assurance level of safety. The meals are pre-made in a safe environment, they're sealed, and they're prepared under strict protocols. It can reduce your stress and planning burden because you're pre-ordering and then just picking it up. And it really can empower students to eat safely, even on campuses with limited options. Um, this is hard though, because it requires you to plan ahead. I know that for me, one of the hardest things about getting diagnosed with celiac disease in college is that I had gone my first 3 years of college eating everywhere and not thinking about it. I just, would run in between classes, grab something to eat. I would just, wing it with my friends and where we were going to dinner. But then all of a sudden I had to plan ahead, and it made it almost impossible to be spontaneous in what I was going to eat and what my dining experience would be. And so, while this does offer a lot of safety assurance, it can be really hard and isolating. On the food service side, it can be challenging for them to manage individual orders and just to know what is actually going to be requested. Self-contained gluten-free pantries or micro kitchens. So this is a model that is used at lots of different places. It's essentially a secured space that is stocked with gluten-free or allergen-free products, as well as appliances, and it's only available to eligible students. So you would get a swipe card, or you would get a key to enter this space. It's good for students with celiac because it's guaranteed access to safe food with access and regular inventory of trusted gluten-free items. It lets you start to really be independent in preparing your own snacks and meals. And it can also build a community of support with students with similar dietary needs all together. But again, there are challenges. It can often be limited numbers of hot meals, and really reliance on pantry access can be very, very isolating. Again, we've talked to many students who live on the opposite side of campus. I've heard stories where they had to bring their own pots and pans, and they had to walk 20 minutes in the snow to go cook their own food. And so there are downsides to this, as well as to every option that is available. And then there are comprehensive allergen-friendly dining programs with customization. And this is sort of the gold standard, I think, and really the easiest one. It's really an inclusive dining model built from the ground up to serve students with food allergies and intolerances, with being able to communicate with chefs and dietitians. It really reduces stigma and isolation by treating a gluten-free need as part of a broader inclusive dining experience. There's really great transparency. There's really great tracking of things, and it makes dietitians available to help students navigate dining and nutritional needs. I would encourage everybody to scan these QR codes and look at how the University of Michigan and Cornell run these programs. People really do love how they do it. But there are also challenges with this model, just like the others. Technology can be confusing, and relying on the customization can also be very time consuming. But I would recommend checking this out. There are a lot of positive experiences with this model. So finally, we have campus life accommodations, and this is where we really get a lot of your questions about things outside of the norm. So athletics and campus recreation, we talk all about the various accommodations you can have there. Study abroad and off-campus programs, I think was one of the more controversial accommodations we included in this, but I do think it's one of the most important. Of course, study abroad is not accessible to everybody, but it is something that is done very widely in the college setting. And so we felt strongly that it was an accommodation that we wrote into these guidelines so that students who wanted to participate in study abroad had the option to do so in a safe way. These also address campus events, clubs, and social gatherings, social and emotional well-being, emergency planning, and then working with internships, co-ops, and campus employment. So again, please do download the handbook and take a very, very close read of these. Also, in the handbook, there is this beautiful table. please read both versions. There is the long, very extended definitions that I sort of just showed you that you'll see in the handbook. But then there's this 2-page table, and this table is really what you want to share with your university because it goes through each element, what its key topic is, and then a description of it in a very easy to manage way. So these 2 pages are the ones that you want to share with your university. So now here are some of the top questions that we get about accommodation. What if I'm in a class with food or lab activities that aren't gluten-free? So first of all, handling gluten is safe for people with celiac disease as long as it's not ingested. So that's a really important point to remember. So you can wash your hands, there can be appropriate cleaning procedures to keep you safe. But at the same time, you do have the right to request modifications and request gluten-free alternatives. So especially if you're in a culinary class or in a lab where you're going to be eating the food, you definitely would want to ask for a gluten-free product or an alternative that would be safe for you. What happens if you get gluten and you can't attend a class or meet a deadline? So if you're experiencing symptoms from a gluten exposure, you should have accommodations that will allow you to access the recorded lecture, join remotely, or get an extension. This is why it is so important that you talk to the Office of Disability Services to make sure that you have accommodations for this in place, even if you don't think you'll use it all the time, which you shouldn't be using it all the time. All right, what if your accommodation needs change during the semester? That will likely happen. Accommodation needs change all the time, and you can update your accommodations at any time during the year by working with the Office of Disability Services. What if my professor doesn't understand or follow them? This is why disability services exist. You should reach out to them immediately. Who do I talk to in the dining department about your needs? So when you set up your accommodations, the Disability Services Office should connect you with a dietitian or a dining services manager. You definitely want to write their information down on that list that I showed you in the beginning of all your key contacts. What if the gluten-free food offered on campus is technically safe, but you don't like it? It is okay to advocate for variety and quality in your meals, and we will talk more about that in the tricky situations in just a few minutes. You're on a sports team. How do you talk to your coach about your needs? Let them know early on. Don't be ashamed. Set up a one-on-one meeting and really let them know your needs. And studying abroad. Again, this is a tricky situation, but first and foremost, research what your options are in the country that you want to visit and then start asking for help. The study abroad office can help you, but really a lot of this is going to be from research that you're going to do. What do I do if an event or a club meeting only serves gluten-containing food? It is okay to bring your own food. First of all, that is always okay, but it's also okay to let the organizer know in advance. You might tell them you have celiac disease. Would it be okay if I bring something for myself? You might also be surprised that they say, we can absolutely help and we'll order you something gluten-free. Now, this one is something that I still feel 22 years after diagnosis. I am tired of explaining my needs over and over again. First of all, that is totally valid, but it will happen. As much as we think that it will stop, it never will. Your entire life, you're going to be explaining your needs with celiac disease. So think about how you're going to explain it. Think about how you are comfortable explaining it in advance so you don't get stuck without knowing what you're going to say. All right, you accidentally ate gluten. Now what? I know you're probably sitting there thinking that would never happen. I'm not going to do that. But let me tell you, it will happen. These situations are inevitable. And even if we try our best, this does happen. So it is important if you are having severe symptoms that you do seek medical attention and that you treat the symptoms that you're having. Hydrate well, get lots of rest, but also let disability services know if you need support. It is very important that you take advantage of your accommodations and don't just try and deal with it yourself. So key takeaways from tonight. Getting accommodations in college is not a one-size-fits-all model, and every accommodation will not apply to every student. There are lots of different ways that colleges are going to handle this. Not any two are exactly identical. And so don't go into this process thinking that it's going to be a simple road to get there. But what I can tell you is that every campus can adopt a solution that can work. It just takes a little bit of effort to get there. the most important thing that you can do to get to be successful is having clear communication and really making sure that you are collaborative with the food service team, the dietitian, disability services, and your medical team. So be ready to communicate and work with all of them. So I'm going to stop there and pass it to Megan.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Okay. So, hi everyone. My name is Megan Donnelly. I am the Director of Health Communications at the Foundation and also a registered dietitian. So I've been tasked with talking about nutrition considerations in celiac disease, which I feel really passionately about in college because this is a time where you're probably making your dietary decisions on your own for the first time. And what I found when I was in college is that I didn't really know how to fuel my body appropriately. And when you're considering a special diet on top of trying to navigate how to really fuel yourself for the first time, it can be a little bit overwhelming. So just for everyone's baseline, I think you all know this, but a strict gluten-free diet for celiac disease is medically necessary, but nutrition quality does matter. And nutrition status can actually impact energy, focus, mood, and even academic performance. So you want to make sure that you're feeding your body well. And this is really important developmentally. This is a life stage where there's a lot of brain development, bone development, and just general performance. You want to make sure that you are really getting the nutrition that you need. Of course, the first part of that is making sure you're following a gluten-free diet. But then I'm also going to talk a little bit about some general nutrition strategies. And keeping in mind that dining with peers is a really important part of the college experience. So finding ways to do that in the context of the school that you're at, I think is really important. I always tell people, you don't want to miss out on that weekend brunch with your friends just because of your celiac disease. It's important that you try to work with your school to find a solution so that you can have those experiences, because it's an important part of the social experience of college. This slide I'm not going to go into the details of every aspect of it, but meeting nutrition needs involves multiple things. It involves making sure you're getting enough carbohydrates to fuel your brain. It involves getting enough protein so that you can develop and grow and build muscle and all of the amazing things that protein does for our bodies. And then fat is really important too for hormones, for brain health, for satiety. So making sure that our meals are really satisfying and fueling us well. So all of the macronutrients are important. And I love to show this graphic from Harvard, which is a gluten-free plate. And I think it's a good representation of what meals should look like in general in order to meet macronutrient needs. So vegetables, fruits, gluten-free whole grains and starches, good protein sources, both plant-based and animal-based, if you are an omnivore, healthy fats, and making sure you're hydrating adequately. So I just like to show this as kind of a visual because a lot of people haven't had a nutrition class, even though they're entering college. I know I never did. In terms of vitamins and minerals, I won't go into details on every single one, but some people love to try to take supplements for everything nowadays. And as a dietitian, it's kind of a pet peeve of mine because we can get most of the nutrients we need from food. And in celiac disease, because the celiac disease affects your digestive system, you want to make sure that you're being even more cautious about getting certain nutrients in your diet. Gluten-free processed foods are also often not fortified with certain vitamins and minerals. And so sometimes diets can be deficient if you're not thinking about how you're getting them. So sometimes taking a multivitamin is a good idea. That decision should be made with your dietitian and your doctor, but you can meet your needs through food fairly easily. And just on this list, if you're kind of looking for themes, fruits and vegetables, leafy greens, nuts and seeds. Those are some of the most nutrient-dense foods that if you're eating a variety of those things on a weekly basis, you're going to be meeting your nutrient needs at least for most of the nutrients that are critical for your health. I know that a lot of times people rely on things like gluten-free bread and gluten-free pasta, and those are great options, but I always like to remind people that there are a lot of really great naturally gluten-free grains and starches, things like amaranth or buckwheat or corn or gluten-free oats or millet or potatoes, quinoa. There are so many options, and a lot of these things are going to be available in the dining halls on campus. And sometimes they're not necessarily going to be in the gluten-free dining space, right? But they're still appropriate to include on a gluten-free diet with certain safety precautions, like asking them if maybe they could get you a clean serving from the back of the dining hall so that you can have it and you don't have to worry about the risk of cross contact. So these things are sometimes available with some additional modification. And a lot of times it really is just saying, hey, can you grab me some of that from the back so that it doesn't touch anything that's gluten containing? A lot of speakers have covered these things. So just for reminders, I mean, in college, there are sometimes options for having housing that has a private kitchen available. I think that's a great option if it's available to you. It's certainly not required, but you can do a lot in a dorm room with just a microwave and a mini fridge. And so it's not required that you have a private kitchen, but it can be helpful if that's an option. If you're using a shared kitchen, like with roommates, you want to use separate labeled cookware and utensils and stored carefully so that you know that they're not being used for gluten-containing items. I will say that as long as these things are clean, they are okay to share technically. So washing works, and you can, as long as you are making sure that everyone understands that you need to be using a clean utensil or surface or something like that, you should be okay to share. But I know it can be a little bit tricky in certain housing situations, and you're not always so sure if everyone's being as clean as you would like. So sometimes having them labeled and separate is just easier, and that's okay too. I think it's a great idea to find other students following a gluten-free diet on campus. It's a great way to make friends, and you can sort of form a network of people who are there to support you and might give you tips about navigating the gluten-free diet in that area if it's not the area you're from. And don't limit yourself only to the gluten-free station if that's what your school has. A lot of made-to-order stations can offer safe options when there's certain cleaning procedures in place. And sometimes schools have very good procedures for preparing gluten-free items in dedicated spaces within those smaller dining places on campus. And so a lot of times when you're looking at colleges, not all of these things are apparent, but speaking to other students and learning about how they navigate celiac disease on campus can really help you understand kind of the ins and outs of your specific school. And Vanessa said this, but please proactively communicate with staff about your dietary needs. It's going to make your experience so much smoother. We were giving this presentation years ago, and something really stuck out to me that one of the college dietitians from a university in the Northeast was actually on the call. And she said, I have all of these things that we do to prepare a safe gluten-free food. And I don't have students come to me and ask for any changes, so I don't know if they like it. And then I see bad reviews about the options that are available. And so that is an unfortunate situation that you can avoid if you are proactive and working with your campus dining and dietitian in order to make the experience better for not only you, but other students. These are just some simple snack ideas. I think they're great. A lot of these are great things to keep in your dorm room, things that are shelf stable, like crackers or gluten-free crackers or rice cakes or roasted chickpeas I have here, nuts and seeds, nut butters. You can also have things like guacamole and salsa and hummus in your fridge, string cheese. These are all really good options that last a long time in a dorm setting, and you can easily bring them on the go with you if you're going between classes. And you can build pretty balanced meals with all of these things, actually. And then just some microwave ideas. These are just a few that we pulled. This is certainly not an exhaustive list. But, you can do a lot with a microwave and a little bit of water and some of these frozen meals. And so get creative. There are a lot of options out there now, luckily. And important questions you want to ask dining and food service before as you're making your decision for where to go to college, ask them about what it is that they do to accommodate a gluten-free diet. Are there dedicated sections? What precautions are they taking? Can they share the ingredients with you for the menus for the day ahead of time? Do they have good signage? Are they able to indicate which items are gluten-free? Are there grab-and-go options? If you have a meal plan, does this meal plan allow you to go to areas on campus where there are more gluten-free options? Does the staff get trained? These are all appropriate questions, and nowadays the majority of them really should have answers. I already talked a little bit about this, but cross-contact is obviously one of the main concerns we hear about, and the best ways to prevent that is really to speak to your college about what they're doing to ensure that you are not going to be exposed to gluten. The dining staff should be aware of gluten-containing ingredients in the recipe they're creating. They should be cleaning and sanitizing between tasks and recipes. They should be always changing their gloves, keeping flour in a sealed labeled container in a designated area, and then washing hands and surfaces with soap and water. This is the most important thing, is that things are being washed. Washing works to remove gluten. You are not being unreasonable to ask for something to be prepared on a surface that has just been cleaned. So work with them, find out more about what they're doing, and let them know that, hey, if something is washed with soap and water, then it is, it's something I can eat off of. This misinformation piece is a huge one. I feel that this is one of the biggest problems when it comes to navigating the gluten-free diet is the misinformation we see online. And I just wanted to put these myths on here and say that they are all myths, and be careful where you get your information. Having tequila will prevent damage from a gluten exposure is not true. You can't kiss your partner if they've eaten gluten at all. That isn't true. Actually, Ann Lee is on the call, and she'll probably talk in a little bit about her study that she did showing that, if you just have a sip of water, there's pretty much no gluten that gets transferred. You don't need to have gluten-free hair and skincare products. That grapes are not washed with wheat flour to make them shine. These are all myths that become, unfortunately, very present online and problematic. These FAQs are all in the booklet that we've shared, so I will not spend a ton of time on these, but when you're thinking about who to talk to about your gluten-free needs, usually it's, in addition to the Office of Disability Services, the campus dietitian, and the dining services manager. And if you become friends with them, they're more likely to bring in a lot of the options that you enjoy. So definitely form a relationship with those people right when you get to campus. Can you tour the dining halls before the semester starts? Definitely, and this is a great idea to learn more about what is available to you. Will someone in dining services be assigned to help you? Usually, yes. Typically, it's a dietitian, not always, but there's usually a point of contact for all dietary restrictions. And then what if you need to order customer pre-ordered meals? A lot of times schools operate this way, where you can pre-order something and pick it up. Ask if this is available, and make sure that the pickup windows actually work with your schedule and are things that you can actually pick up, because it's the worst when there's like 2-hour window to pick something up, and that's when you have class and you can't make it. So definitely communicate with them about those things. How often should you check in? I think as much as you feel like you need to. You are not being annoying. It is in your best interest and the school's best interest to make sure you get this right. So I definitely think the more communication, the better. What if the food offered is technically safe, but you don't like the options? This happens, and I get it. It's okay to ask for more variety and better quality in your meals. The story I told before about the dietitian on campus who thought she was doing a good job, but actually wasn't meeting the needs of the students that were following that meal plan. she was upset. She took action to change it. And so work with the school as best you can. We've seen success with a lot of this with different students, really advocating for themselves on campus. And it did lead to significant menu improvements. What if they're really boring? Along the same things, work with your dining services team in order to get options that work for you and are supporting your health. And then what if the campus can't meet your needs? This is one, they really are, this is really not an acceptable answer, but of course we know, unfortunately, it sometimes does happen. And so in that case, you would be within your rights to request a formal exemption from the required meal plan, and you would work with the Office of Disability Services to obtain that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emma.
All right. Oh my goodness, such tough acts to follow. But my name is Emma, and I work at the Celiac Disease Foundation on the Education and Community Engagement team. And I also have celiac disease myself. I was diagnosed when I was 16 years old. So really just before I was getting ready to head off to college. And I went through all 4 years of college with celiac disease, and I also did that living on campus and on-campus housing all 4 years as well with a roommate who was not gluten-free. And I did help specifically develop the housing section of our college recommendations booklet. So this is just a brief overview of some of that information that you'll find in there, along with just some tips that I picked up along the way, and really just what I wish I knew before I went off to college. Right. So I think it should be very clear to you by now at this point in the presentations, but your celiac disease needs, they go so much beyond just the dining hall and the food that you're eating. Celiac disease is going to play a huge role in many of the decisions you make regarding your housing for college. And here are just some key questions to consider. Will you have access to a kitchen? Some dorms have shared kitchens while others don't. And if being able to cook your own food and your own meals often is very important to you, then keep in mind that when making your housing decisions. And how will you prepare and store food if you don't have access to a kitchen? You should think about bringing small kitchen appliances with you to have in your dorm, like a mini fridge with a freezer, a microwave, or even other cooking appliances if your school can allow those. But you may need to talk to your housing office if they need to make an exception for you on existing rules around those appliances in dorm rooms. And also, how will you talk to your roommates about your needs? I know for me personally, I'm an only child, and when I went gluten-free, my parents made most of the house gluten-free too. So going to college was the very first time I was going to experience having a roommate and living gluten-free with celiac disease in a shared environment. And I definitely was a little bit nervous beforehand about how that would go really, and how I would tell my roommate about my celiac disease. But really just communicating openly and honestly about your needs is the most important thing, and I really can't stress that enough. And you can absolutely talk to your roommates before you even get to campus. You'll likely be connected with them as early as you can. And you can easily plan ahead of time that way, what it will look like to advocate for yourself and plan ahead what you want to say and what you want them to know. And really just emphasizing that advocating for yourself is a lifelong skill that you have to have just in general, but it's especially important if you have celiac disease. And in college, this may be one of the first times you're really putting that skill to the test more independently. And it may be intimidating at first, and it's probably going to take some practice, and it may even be exhausting at times. But I like to tell people, and even remind myself at times, that you are the expert on your health, and people often can't help you unless you tell them how. But a great way to practice advocating for yourself in a much smaller and controlled setting is just talking to your roommate or roommates about your needs. And here are the accommodations we developed specifically for navigating campus housing in celiac disease. This is just an overview of what we have in that recommendations booklet. But first, flexible roommate selection. That can be a very useful accommodation to you, as it can allow you to request specific roommates who you got to talk to in advance or who may better understand your needs. And it can enable you to opt out of random roommate selection if that's needed. In my case, I ended up meeting my college roommate in a Facebook group for my college before roommate decisions were made. We got to get to know each other a little bit, and I got to tell her about my celiac disease. And we were able to request each other for roommates when it came time for that. Also, prioritized housing selection, which is going to look a bit different at every school depending on what types of housing are offered there. But here are just some common examples on how prioritized housing selection can look for you. So early access to the housing selection process so that you can select a housing option that meets your needs, such as getting to select an apartment with a kitchen that might not normally be available to you otherwise. Normally, those are reserved for upperclassmen. And getting to live in housing that is closer to on-campus dining options, like we mentioned earlier, especially important on very large campuses. And if it's needed, then allowing access to private or low occupancy dorms or apartments. And I do include this one only because everyone's situation is different and every school is different. And this may be an option that's going to just work best for you. But I will say I lived with roommates in dorms and apartments with plenty of not gluten-free people, and I did fine. And it's such a huge part of the social experience at college. And some of my best memories have come from not choosing to live in housing that was a bit more isolating by nature. So I do advise you to consider some of the other options first, so you can still experiencing that. But again, everyone's situation is different. And lastly, another example that is important is if you're living in dorms with communal bathrooms, is ensuring those bathrooms are accessible to you and nearby. You may be able to work with your campus housing office to ensure that you're not in a room that's farthest away from the bathrooms. And I briefly touched on this earlier, but the appliances in dorm rooms is a big one. Since it's likely that you may not have access to a kitchen your first year, or it may be a shared kitchen with your entire floor or building even. So allowing you to keep some small kitchen appliances in your dorm rooms, like a microwave, a mini fridge with a freezer, even air fryers or other cooking appliances if they're allowed. The air fryers and other cooking appliances, many schools just simply can't allow those in the dorms due to fire codes, but some do. It really just depends. But if your school says specifically that fridges and microwaves are not allowed, you would that doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't allowed, period, because you would be requesting to have those in your dorm room as an accommodation for your celiac disease, and schools can make an exception because of that. Some dorms, especially in the Northeast in particular, they're very old buildings, and the electrical just may not be able to support if everybody in that dorm had a mini fridge and a microwave in their room. But if a few people who actually need it are just using them at a time, then that might likely be okay. And next is transportation access. A rule that many schools have is that first-year students are often not allowed to have cars on campus. So if that is a rule at your school, like it was at mine, you may be able to request an exception to that. So you are able to go get groceries or go to medical appointments if that's needed. And again, I do include this one just because everyone's specific situation is going to be different, but off-campus housing exemption may be an option for you too, because several schools do require that you live in on-campus housing for at least your first year if you're not local, while some schools like mine, they even required it for all 4 years. You had to be there. But if your needs cannot be met in on-campus housing, then this might be an option that you consider. because that just might be what works best for you in your situation. But again, like I said earlier, living in on-campus housing is a huge social component and can be one of the most fun parts about going to college. And students with celiac disease can absolutely live and thrive in on-campus housing. It just might take a couple of extra planning and steps to get there. And I also felt it was important to set up some of those expectations for what is not reasonable to ask for and for accommodating your celiac disease. You shouldn't expect your roommate to never cook or eat gluten, demand a gluten-free only kitchen or living space, assume that your roommates will avoid gluten entirely or change their diets for you, expect them to never eat gluten around you. All shared kitchen appliances need to be gluten-free only, like the oven or the microwave. Requiring dedicated gluten-free dorms. These are all things that we've actually heard examples of before that people have wanted to ask for. But really, I want you to be careful what you ask for. And frankly, a lot of these things sound super isolating, which you're not going to want to do anyway. And I can say from experience that that those things just simply aren't necessary. But what is perfectly reasonable to ask for of your roommates is that they keep things clean after making gluten-containing food. Shared appliances are kept clean. Food, and if you wanted to have your own separate utensils, maybe labeling them and storing them separately, and expecting that your roommates understand and simply respect your gluten-free needs. And I cannot stress this enough that students with celiac disease can absolutely live and thrive with others who do not have celiac disease. So just keep that in mind and always consider that when approaching your housing accommodations for celiac disease. And I did also just want to briefly touch on resolving roommate conflicts because that can happen on occasion. But just to set you up for success from the very beginning, start with education and open communication with your roommates, and introduce yourself to your roommates before you even move in. You'll likely be connected with them as soon as you can. And this is the perfect opportunity to explain your celiac disease and whatever else you want to share with them. And you can discuss what gluten-free is and the importance of preventing cross-contact. And you can even consider sharing educational materials like those that you can find in the booklet of recommendations with them, just to help inform them. And that can all just make the world of a difference for you. And just some communication tips. These are just great in general, but specifically for celiac disease, using I statements to avoid conflict. Like, I feel most comfortable using separate cookware versus you can't use my pans. And framing requests as safety measures and not restrictions, like keeping the counters clean keeps me healthy versus clean the counters, you made them dirty. And really how you approach those conversations, if they do arise, is really huge. And also setting boundaries and creating systems very early on in the school year. So labeling food and kitchen items clearly that you wish to keep separate, and you can agree on how and when to clean the shared kitchen space, and emphasize the importance of cleaning before and after meal preparation, and include food storage, kitchen use, and cleaning expectations to avoid cross-contact in a formal roommate agreement. Which we do have a great example of in the recommendations booklet, but this is just something that many schools have everyone do anyway, just because it's a great space to communicate needs and write all of that information out that you want each other to know. But of course, when conversations don't go well, please know that you can approach your resident assistants or RAs, or even other housing staff for mediation if conflicts in general do persist, especially if those conflicts are around your celiac disease. But please know from what I've heard and from my own experience, this is very rare, but it's also absolutely not okay. So please speak up if that does happen. And lastly, I just wanted to end with a little college checklist. So before you do any of this, of course, reference the recommendations booklet. But before you arrive on campus, you're going to want to register with your college's disability office. And through that, you'll request housing accommodations as soon as possible. And you also can talk to your roommates about your celiac disease before moving in and create that roommate agreement. And you'll pack your gluten-free cooking tools and small appliances. You'll find out where you can safely eat, both on and off campus, like grocery stores, cafes, bakeries, restaurants. Some of those might even be on your campus. But most importantly, just remember that you can absolutely live and thrive with others who do not have celiac disease. College can be one of the most fun years of your life, especially if you live on campus with roommates. And just because you have celiac disease, it doesn't mean you'll miss out on that.
Okay, thank you, Emma. I'm going to ask all of the panelists to come on because we are going to talk through some case studies style tricky situations. So here is our first one. So Jesse is a freshman at a small university. He came to school with a 504 plan from a public high school and was told during orientation that there were plenty of gluten-free options and to just ask when he arrived for meals. But he's been there for a month now, and the only regular options are the salad bar, but of course there's the cross-contact risk, white rice at the International Food Station with gluten-free soy sauce, hamburger, hot dog, or grilled chicken with no bun, and gluten-free granola bars at the coffee shop. So I would like to ask the panel, what should Jesse do differently?
If you want, I can start, and I'm going to just reference what Emma was just talking about. The first and most important thing is that to really embrace that you are your own best advocate. And Jesse just needs to reach back out to the Office of Disabilities, Food Service, the dietitian, and to really let them know that, having the same hot dog or grilled chicken 5 times during the week is really not the best nutritional options for him. I'm going to encourage you to really believe that you are your own best advocate. You know your body and your needs better than anyone else. You just need to find that script, to describe it to the staff there and let them know what you need. And as Emma said, don't ask for steak and baked potatoes. But let's ask for something reasonable,
And I'll just jump in here. This reminds me of Megan's example that she gave of the dietitian on the campus who had wished that they had knew before the bad reviews came that there were issues, like talking to the folks, whoever the right folks are, whether it's the school dietitian, the food service manager, whether it's of a specific dining hall or even for the overall university, to try and get this corrected.
So I think what I'd like to say is it's important for Jesse to have been educated. It's overwhelming and frightening. I mean, if you are a student there, you've just arrived on campus, even though you've been through these talks, it's just overwhelming. So I think having someone that Jesse can talk to and almost get that push that you are your own advocate and you can do it. So like a coach. So I wonder if that's something one can think about. As I'm listening to you and I'm listening to you, Francie, it's easy for us to sit here and say that, right? So how do we empower our children that this is something that you should do and you should advocate? So that training needs to happen a few years prior to this, right?
It absolutely does. I think of when my son went to college as a freshman, and the college he went to is a small college, did not have any gluten-free options at all. And so we went, to visit the campus ahead of time. And I think as parents, we can, because both myself and my son have celiac disease, that we can train them early. And we went to, made the appointments ahead of time, went to visit the dietitian and the food service manager. We brought them gluten-free brownies. We brought them all kinds of things and really made sure that they knew who Patrick was, and that we really kind of paved that way. When he was on campus, I sent him things to bring to the dining staff to remind them who he is. And I think that we as parents need to coach our children, but also as a healthcare provider, I had these conversations with my pediatric patients as they're freshmen in high school that you need to, get to know these people and make sure that you know their names and that you learn how to advocate for yourself and how to communicate that. Bringing something to share is always a great door opener.
Yeah.
So we need to train our parents as well, that we have to get
Yes.
our children to do some of this. And, the folks in the dining hall need to know you by your name. I know my son, when he went to University of Miami, the first time I went there, like they all knew, hi pronoun, and here's your sandwich. I'm like, okay, we have our food ready here. Not only that, because it's at networking. So I think it's a education for the child and the education for the parents before the child arrives at campus. And then Jesse, should be advocating and going off to that, whether it's a dietitian or the disability office, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
will be positive. By the time my son left college, they had a gluten-free station that was manned by food service workers. They all knew him by name. It's so that these are skills that will help them not only in college, but then to advocate as they enter the work world as well.
I'm sure Drew had everyone handing out gluten-free dining hall coupons and everything else to you.
Oh gosh, no, I wasn't that strong of an advocate to get them handing things out, but they did know me by a name by the fourth year, so that was good.
All right, I'm going to move us to the next one. Maya's roommates are extremely messy, which, this can happen. Maya's a junior at a medium-sized university in Chicago and was diagnosed with celiac disease by a local physician 1 year ago, so fairly recently. She's living in a dorm with 3 roommates, which has a full kitchen, and she can use her meal plan to buy groceries, which is awesome. And she purchases naturally gluten-free products and specialty items like gluten-free pasta and bread and pizza crust, but her roommates are extremely messy, especially in the kitchen, and are terrible about washing the dishes and pots and pans. And there's gluten residue everywhere. And her roommates often eat her gluten-free food because they haven't been to the store. So how should she handle this with her roommates?
I mean, I think it really goes back to, the main theme here, which is communication, and it was brought up earlier how important it is to use I statements to kind of avoid the conflict, and I feel like that's a huge tool to kind of take into this type of conversation. I mean, this is actually one of the conversations I encountered when I was first diagnosed because I was in one of those shared apartment-like situations, and when I just kind of brought it back to this is something that I'm dealing with, and I don't want it to affect you guys, but um, we got to be in this together. Unfortunately, they were all very understanding when I just tried to make it as little of their problem as possible. And yeah, I'm curious what other thoughts are.
I would say advocate to reach out to the resident advisor, someone in the dorm, because if you're already living there, it may get tricky to then kind of say, well, this is a new way we need to do this, but you may bring someone in to help you negotiate, but I think framing it as is that this is something you need, but you don't want to be burdensome to them is important. Very simple, practical things. Paper plates work, wash the pot before you use it, because ultimately you need to protect yourself. But that's key. Try to navigate it, try to communicate, but bottom line, there are lots of other, practical things you can do to keep yourself safe.
And I think on the communication front, one of the issues that stands out to me in this particular example is the fact that the roommate's eating her groceries. And I think the thing that they probably don't understand is that she has those groceries there because of limited options in dining halls and other areas on campus. And so that then when she can't get food elsewhere and comes back to the dorm and it's gone because someone didn't think it was a big deal, it is more of a problem than maybe some of the roommates are thinking. So again, those I statements, but actually not just in terms of framing it as an I station, but really thinking through the fact that they don't really have the same issues that you do. And you need to make sure that they understand why having food that you are expecting to be there still be there is so important.
Yeah, I was gonna emphasize the same thing, is that I think it's important to start the conversation with understanding what they understand about why, what's going on and what your concerns are. It may not be that there's, malicious intent. They may just really not understand, or not know what's going on. Sadly, I hope that by junior year, she's hopefully living with some good, good friends. And if not, she maybe should get a letter from her doctor so she can work on that. But I think using the I statements and just starting off by understanding what they understand about Maya's, situation with school and eating, I think is the best place to start.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move us to this one. Justin's friends say just join in the fun. So he's a freshman at a large school and was diagnosed when he was really young, 3 years old, and wasn't growing. And he doesn't have a noticeable reaction when he ingests gluten. And Greek life is big at his school, so he's pledging a fraternity at the parties. He's regularly getting pressure to have beer and participate in games since he isn't symptomatic. And up to this point, he has never consumed gluten, but is considering it to fit in. Does it matter to have gluten occasionally if it doesn't make you feel sick?
I'll start with this one because this one I think is just very sad. What a horrible situation to be in. If at all possible, I would say, try and pledge someplace else where maybe they would be more understanding. But that's really hard for someone in this situation to do because you don't have, when you're just starting out as a freshman, that cohort, that the people that you can rely on. So anyway, so again, I found this really sad, but I think it goes back to what we've been talking about in some of these others, is communication and making sure that you are with people who support you and respect your needs.
I also think that at the time that you have that appointment before you get to college, it's important for the practitioner to give them a list of all the gluten-free alcohols, because we all know it's going to happen. So I think that empowers. No parent wants to hear it, but that is true, right? I mean, this is what happens. So giving them that list there is important, and then educating them that it's what would happen if you have gluten. But at least if they're armed with a list, then they know, okay, I can have this or I can have that. Does become important. Not always easy to do it, but at least you have the knowledge base.
I'll just tag in with Dr. Verma and say that perhaps not during the party, but there are typically someone within the fraternity or sorority environment that are in charge of the pledges, and maybe they could, again, advocate for themselves just to explain a little bit more that this is happening, so that if there is an environment in which it's food or beer or anything that they have to do in a fraternity setting, someone else would be looking out for him besides maybe his peers. So it's not a good feeling, though.
I think, again, going back to communication, let the others know what your condition is, because they may just not understand. They may not understand the impact of having the beer, and there are alternatives that you can participate without drinking beer.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate the very important point that just because you don't feel sick doesn't mean that you're not getting sick. And I think for Justin, he needs to maybe talk with his providers about that, because, he was diagnosed really young. Maybe he doesn't know that, which, it's very possible. Okay, so I know we're a little over time, but if anyone has questions they would like to ask in the Q&A, you can certainly put them in. I don't see any in there at this point, but let me just take a quick look at things that have already been answered so that people can hear them out loud. Will the slides be shared? We will be sending out an email with a link to the recording of this video. So if you want to share it with your friends, share it with people you know that will be sent out in a little bit. Okay, we have one more, and Vanessa, I might just ask you to summarize this out loud. Housing options have different price points. Are you able to negotiate costs based on your accommodations?
Yes. So we yes and no. So it's not like a straight price negotiation. The law says that they have to provide reasonable accommodations, including housing accommodations. And so they could waive fees for things that are like deemed medically necessary. And this is like one of the reasons it's really important to talk to your provider about it. Because if it's in your provider letter that you need access to a kitchen, then it's considered something medically necessary to accommodate. So they can't charge you extra for those things. But they don't, there's not like a requirement to like lower the price necessarily. So again, you're going to want to work with your provider to make sure that it's written in that letter, and then also work with disability services so that it's framed as an accommodation or an access need as opposed to just a straight out financial request.
Perfect. Okay. I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to our participants for being here and being so engaged with the presentation. Like I said, we're going to be sending a recording out, which you are welcome to share with others. So thank you so much, and